Gwart Show is sponsored by Ellipsis Labs. Ellipsis Labs is building Atlas, the blockchain purpose-built for verifiable finance. You may know of Ellipsis Labs by their first product, Phoenix, a fully on-chain order book DEX that's done over $50 billion in unincentivized volume. This is one of the strongest teams I know in crypto. If you're interested in working for a mission-driven company, Ellipsis Labs is hiring engineers who are passionate about crypto and finance to work on Atlas. You can learn more and apply on Ellipsis Labs Twitter, @ellipsis_labs. Don't forget to check out Atlas too, @AtlasXYZ on Twitter.
Hey guys, today we have on a very, very special guest that probably needs almost no introduction, Justin Drake. We're actually recording on Thanksgiving. I'm thinking maybe he only agreed to come on because it was Thanksgiving and he was trying to see if I was dedicated enough to podcasting to take time out of my day on Thanksgiving, and the answer is yes. So welcome, Justin Drake. And if you want to just go ahead and start talking about what you're working on, Beam Chain, a lot of announcements recently, but you don't need to introduce yourself. I think everybody knows who you are.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and congrats to the dedication for podcasting. So what do I do? Basically, I'm an Ethereum researcher. I've been such for 7 years now, and during the 7 years, I've done all sorts of different things. But one of the things that I've helped with is the beacon chain, which is basically the move from proof of work to proof of stake. And since the beacon chain was launched, since I should say the spec was frozen 5 years ago, the research has continued. So even though in some sense what has gone on chain has largely been frozen, the research has very much continued. And many other things have happened in the last 5 years. One of them is that MEV exploded in a big way. And we now have a much better appreciation for the negative externalities and a better appreciation for mechanisms to defend against MEV. And then another thing that happened is SNOX blossomed in a very, very big way, both in terms of performance, but just seems to be relentless. Maybe every year there's a 5 to 10x improvement on proof performance. And that is due to the compounding of many different layers of the stack, the proof systems, the arithmetization, the algorithms that are used within the CPUs and the GPUs, and various other things. And then there's this very recent trend of so-called ZKVMs, which basically democratize SNOX to the broader programming community that is not necessarily experts in SNOX or SNOX circuits. And the third thing that I guess happened in the last 5 years is that we realized we made a bunch of mistakes, right? So sometimes we rushed while we tried to go as fast as we could to launch the beacon chain because there was this pressure to move as quickly as possible away from proof of work. We were printing 5,000 ETH per day, or maybe it was. I don't want to say something silly, but maybe it was closer to 10,000 ETH per day. Anyway, I need to go check. Basically, a huge amount of money was spent towards basically e-waste, and we wanted to basically cut down this waste and also limit the amount of sell pressure that was happening on E30 token. And now, with the benefit of the hindsight, with the MEV, the SNOX, and the technical debt that we've realized, I felt like it was a time to rethink from first principles all of the learnings that we had. And one of the kind of realizations that I had at one point, kind of staring at the big picture roadmap, is that it just feels there's just so much work to be done. If we are to continue on the current path. The roadmap is extremely ambitious. You can think of it as maybe humanity's most ambitious decentralized computing roadmap, and it was potentially going to take decades to complete. And so what I asked myself is, can I pour some accelerationist fuel on the roadmap? Can we somehow take the slowest items in the roadmap and try and complete them within a few years? And I think the answer is yes. And basically, this is what the Beam Chain proposal is all about: is to try and accelerate the advent of maintenance mode for Ethereum, the advent of what you could call pre-ossification, where basically the roadmap is cleared, there's no more big changes, and from now onwards, it's kind of smooth sailing, where the layer 1, which is meant to maximize for robustness and security, can be largely left alone for the next decades and centuries.
Awesome. Okay, you've done a number of podcasts now on the Beam chain. You also went on the Bankless Summit to announce this. So I would sort of refer people to a lot of the other stuff you've done as of late. So, but with that said, would you give like a very short synopsis of like the sort of points that stand out with this new Beam chain proposal? Like just a quick rundown so we can kind of like, start from there.
Sure. So basically, there's 3 different layers within the Ethereum L1. There's the execution layer with the EVM, the data layer with the blobs, and the consensus layer. And I believe that the execution and data layer are, on a path to complete their roadmaps within 5 years. So I, chose to focus on the consensus layer to keep things more digestible. And it is also where I believe there's more of a need for acceleration. And within the consensus layer, there's like these 9 upgrades that we want to do. And these are kind of upgrades that are part of Vitalik's roadmap diagram, with the merge, the surge, the splurge, blah, blah, blah. But what I've done is that I've tried to specifically highlight the updates within this layer of the stack, and boil them down to the 9 upgrades. And the 9 upgrades kind of fall into 3 different buckets. There's the block production bucket, which is very much a reflection of all the MEV learnings that we've had. Things like, how do we improve censorship resistance in the face of extremely high centralization of the builders? Another big upgrade is this notion of validator isolation. So right now, as a validator, I'm exposed to the MEV pipeline. I have to connect to relays. I have to play timing games. I might have to provide pre-confirmations. And all of these things basically increase the sophistication to staking. And what if instead we kind of have a very, very clean separation between the MEV pipeline and the staking? And the 2 big ideas that have basically happened in 2024 are, number 1, execution tickets, and number 2, execution auctions. And they fall within this broader category, which we call APS, attested proposer separation. And then there's kind of a final topic in the block production bucket, which is faster slots. Is this idea that when we chose the parameters for the beacon chain, we were extremely conservative. What we wanted to make sure is that anyone with a home internet connection could participate, even if you were in Australia with high latency. What we've realized in the last few years is that we can maintain this requirement of keeping the barrier to entry low from an internet standpoint, but still reduce the slot times. One ballpark number basically is to reduce them to 4 seconds. Next, we have the staking bucket, where we've realized that we kind of messed up the issuance curve. The issuance curve kind of forces economically all rational ETH holders to stake, and having everyone staking is kind of bad for several reasons. It means that we're overpaying for security, where we have like too much and unnecessary sell pressure to pay for taxes, but maybe more importantly, we lose raw ETH, pristine ETH, as a unit of account for collateral in the context of DeFi. And the reason is that your rational move is to first stake and then have some sort of LST and then use the LST to use as collateral. And the problem with the LSTs is that they jeopardize the credible neutrality of ETH. They introduce a new token, a new security assumption, new governance, new possibilities for contract bugs, and so they potentially, greatly jeopardize the moneyness, the monetary premium of ETH or the asset. And then the final, the second item in staking would be just to lower the barrier to entry from an economic standpoint. So right now you need 32 ETH to be a validator. I call it whale staking because 32 ETH is $100,000. What if we could reduce that to just 1 ETH to become a validator? And there's a few ideas there to to pull that off. And then the final item in the staking bucket is faster finality. Like, how do we go from the current time to finality, which is about 15 minutes, to something closer to 15 seconds? And then the final bucket is cryptography, where there's chain snarkification as one of the big ticket items. The idea here is that we snarkify the whole chain in real time, so that anyone who wants to consume the chain, whether you're a wallet or a light client within a contract on another L1, or even a validator, or whatever entity wants to consume the Ethereum blockchain, they can do so in a trustless way with very, very little resources. Think a smartwatch. And then the second big item in the cryptography bucket is quantum security, whereby we want to have cryptography that is robust for the next decades and centuries. And what we have right now is not post-quantum secure. And then finally, there's this upgrade around improving the randomness with VDFs.
Okay. So we'll dive into all those in a bit. But I know you're big on memes, right? You created, well, you're, I believe the creator of the ultrasound money meme. You understand the power of memetics, as you like to say. What is the meme? If you had to synthesize the meme for Beam Chain, what is the meme? And do you think the meme is as powerful as something like the ultrasound money was, at least, for a period of time there, right? Like, I mean, and not to say that's not anymore. I'm just saying that it did resonate, right? And there was a lot of people talking about it. You had the website, you had people putting the little bat ticker thing in their Twitter bios. Like there was a meme, right? And there still is to a large extent. What is the meme behind the Beam Chain? How do you rally the community behind this?
Yeah, so I guess we should try and understand, like, what is the target audience for the meme? Like, which brains are you trying to infect? And like in the short term, the brains I'm trying to infect are devs, right? This is a recruitment exercise in some sense. And I'm very pleased to say that this recruitment exercise has been wildly successful. So about 100 people have reached out after my talk. And there's actually exactly 7 new teams that have formed that want to build a Beam client. So there's the 5 existing teams plus the 7 new teams. So there's a total of 12 new teams, 12 teams that want to build a Beam client. And in addition to that, there's about 50 individual devs who kind of just want to help out. And what I've been doing in the last few days is basically having interviews with as many of these people as possible, so that I can try and place them within one of the existing teams, or maybe hire them within the Ethereum Foundation, or somehow find some sort of collaboration that will help push the Beam chain.
Okay. One other thing before we dive in. The day before your announcement, my friend, Doug Colquitt, put out a tweet where he was speculating about what you were going to say. These were his speculations. 1 second block times, single slot finality, and a native ZK EVM. This got over 2,500 likes and over 500,000 views. And reading the replies, this idea seemed fairly popular from what I could tell. Why don't we just do this? Is this too hard?
Great question. So I guess the second one, the single slot finality, is part of the Beam chain vision. So he was partially correct. And I would even give him some credit for the final one, which is fully snarkifying the EVM chain with the native rollups. And the reason is that it's basically the same idea, but a different layer of the stack. So remember how the Beam chain is all about focusing on the consensus layer. Basically, when you snarkify the consensus layer, you get the Beam chain. If you snarkify the EVM, you get the native rollups, which is what he's advocating for. And I'm hugely bullish on native rollups. I've been sharing native rollups for a couple of years now, I believe that I even coined the term enshrined rollup, which is basically the previous name before native rollups. The people didn't like the term enshrined rollup, so it was kind of rebranded to native rollups. Now, on the 1 second slot time, I would give Doug maybe like a quarter of the points. And the reason is that, yes, directionally he is correct, that we are reducing, or at least I'm proposing to reduce the slot times. I should highlight that this is just a proposal. But the ethos of Ethereum is to have like maximally decentralized L1. And that means being very, very friendly to solar validators on home internet connections with high latency. And I don't think we can get to 1 second. And the reason is that we want to have tens of thousands of active validators per slot. And that means aggregating all of these signatures within 1 second, plus all the time to gossip. It's just, it seems like an impossible engineering problem to solve. Now, the good news is that we have this amazing technology called pre-confirmations, which basically abstracts away the L1 slot time. So from the point of view of the user, they don't know, they will not know and won't be impacted by the layer 1 slot time by default, even for base rollups. So if you look at the L2s, so if you look at Arbitrum, for example, they have 250 millisecond slot times, and they've abstracted away the L1 slot time of 12 seconds. We could increase the L1 slot time to a whole minute. You know, Arbitrum users wouldn't really notice the difference. Now, for base rollups, which is something that I've been trying to advocate for, there is some value to having the lower slot times. And the reason is that whenever one of the validators, for whatever reason, happens to be offline or is not working properly, then, you know, for a whole slot, there won't be pre-confirmations. And so there's like this edge case where, you know, 0.x% of the time, you know, you skip a beat from a pre-confirmation standpoint, and you have to wait a whole slot. And it's much better to wait 4 seconds than it is to wait 12 seconds. Now, my personal experience using the internet is that, you know, sometimes it skips a beat, right? Like I'm traveling, and, you know, it connects, you know, to 5G or 4G, and then, you know, it takes 4 seconds for the website to load, and I'm just perfectly fine if that happens only 1% of the time. And so that's the kind of UX that I'm hoping we can have with base rollups.
Okay, so I have some questions about pre-confirmations, and these are some of the reservations that I've heard from people who have discussed or, you know, had thoughts about these. One of the reservations is pre-confs may require validators to have additional overhead in terms of economic security to guarantee inclusion. So if we're trying to move toward a validating set where maybe 1 ETH is, you know, sufficient to spin up a validating node, would pre-confs in this context require also additional capital in order to, you know, give these? And is this really, can we reconcile this with the idea of, you know, reducing the barriers to entry to validating?
Yeah, great question. So in the context of the Beam chain where we have these 1 ETH validators, the answer is no. And the reason is validator isolation. So you remember that one of the things that I said is that right now, you know, the validators have to worry about things like timing games and connecting to relays and pre-confirmations. But with validator isolation, they don't have to worry about it. So basically, the entities that are providing pre-confirmations in a post-APS world, so post-attested proposer separation, would be sophisticated entities, not the validators. Now, in the short term, pre-APS, the answer is yes, you do need the validators to provide some form of collateral. So the number that I have in mind is basically 1 ETH. So in addition to the 32 ETH that they're staking, they would need to place 1 ETH bond. And by the way, this 1 ETH is per operator, not per validator. So if you control 10 validators, you just need to put 1 ETH, and that will cover all 10 validators. And that is kind of sufficient to collateralize the pre-confirmations. Now, you may ask another question, which is, what about the technical sophistication from a DevOps perspective? Right? In order to provide high-quality pre-confirmations, you need to have, you know, very high uptime, very high bandwidth. You need to have, you know, low latency, and, you know, need to be potentially running nodes and special software. And that's not something that the sort of validators will do. Now, the good news is that we have this design where there's this entity called the gateway, which is basically the equivalent of a relay for pre-confirmations. And so as a validator, what I do is I place this 1 ETH bond, and then I delegate to a gateway, and then I'm done. right? The gateway just does all of the heavy lifting. And all of this is just for a few years as kind of a temporary solution while we all wait for APS.
So this is kind of like PBS, but specifically for pre-confs.
Exactly, PBS for pre-confs.
So post APS, this trusted relay goes away then, is what you're saying?
Exactly. Like the relays disappear, and you as a user, you're directly interacting with the pre-confer, like the entity that's giving the pre-confirmations. So they would have basically purchased the right to provide pre-confirmations and to build the block basically in the next lot, whether that's through purchasing an execution ticket and winning the lottery, or through basically winning the execution auction.
Okay, got it. All right. The other thing that I think is a question I definitely want to probe on, there is a difference between inclusion pre-confs and execution pre-confs, right? So inclusion pre-confs essentially means, okay, you're going to get included. Now, what users care about is, how am I going to get included, right? At what price? If it's a swap, if it's a borrow, whatever it may be, this makes a huge difference, right? So can you talk to us a little bit about that and why people may have some reservations that say, okay, inclusion pre-confs may be viable, maybe even easier to some extent. This execution pre-confs, like giving people guaranteed, pricing on their orders or swaps or sends, whatever it may be, is quite different.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there's two different types of pre-confs. The inclusion pre-confs, where you have a guarantee as a user that your transaction will get included by a certain slot. And then you have the execution pre-confs, where you know exactly how the transaction will be executed. For example, if you're doing a Uniswap trade, as you highlighted. Now, the good news is that for L2s, you can get the best kind of pre-confirmations. You can get the execution pre-confs. Unfortunately, for the L1, you can get inclusion pre-confs all the time, and you can only get execution pre-confs for the subset of slots for which the proposer has opted in to provide pre-confirmations. So it's kind of it's, in my opinion, bad to rely on execution pre-confs at L1, and the reason is that you'll just get a bad UX where, like, some of the time it just won't work. Now, we have basically different teams working on different types of pre-confs. So, for example, there's the Bolt project from Chainbound, which is working on the L1 pre-confs. And as you said, those are relatively simple, and I expect them to basically be a thing in 2025, where basically your wallet, for example, MetaMask, will just show you a green check mark within one ping time, and it'll say, hey, yes, your transaction will be included in the next slot, or by some slot number, which is not too far in the future. And the good news is that you'll pay almost nothing for this. It will be almost free. That you won't really realize it as a user. And then there's kind of the stronger form of pre-confirmations, which all of the L2s will be able to provide. And the good news is that, if indeed users will move to the L2s, then this will apply for the vast majority of users. They'll be able to get this premium experience where within one ping time, they know exactly how the transaction will execute. Now, the key technical challenge in pre-confirmations is, how do you price the so-called pre-confirmation tip? Because when you have the proposer basically make a pre-conf, there's an opportunity cost, right? Like they're locking in a specific state transition, which will reduce potentially the MEV that they could have gotten had they not given the pre-confirmation. And so the solution basically that we're suggesting is to involve a new entity, which are basically fancy searchers called prices. So you remember how you have this gateway, which is the equivalent of a relay for pre-confirmations. Well, the gateway would be running an auction where the various prices would compete against each other to provide the lowest pre-confirmation tip. And the prices would be the ones that are bearing the MEV risk. So, for example, you have a pricer which is willing to sell a pre-confirmation for, let's say, $10. And if the market moves against the pricer, For example, the arbitrage opportunity increases in the next few seconds, and the proposer could have gotten more money from the arbitrage. Then basically the pricer is going to compensate the proposer for the loss of the arbitrage opportunity. So they kind of act like an insurance mechanism, and they will pocket the $10 that they've sold it for. And so long as they're able to price the expected amount of MEV, by the end of the slot, and they sell the pre-confirmations for a fair value plus a little bit, plus a little epsilon, then they'll be profitable.
Thanks for listening to The Gwart Show on the Blockspace Podcast Network. Subscribe to our newsletter at blockspace.media to get the show directly to your inbox. Show links, transcripts, and Bitcoin articles twice per week. Stay ahead of the conversation by visiting blockspace.media.
All right, I want to move on a little bit to the issuance discussion now. I've heard from, so I don't know if this is, I don't know if this goes against what you think, but I have heard some people, I guess like some people from Lido, for example, argue that a larger net rewards for the Ethereum blockchain, it incentivizes a more diverse or distributed validator set. And I think your argument now is like we want to reduce issuance as a whole. Do you think that this is in contrast to some people who believe, if there's a just generally, all else equal, higher reward rate, there will be a more distributed validator set as a whole? And so what are your kind of thoughts on people who would make that argument?
Right. Well, in the limit where we have let's say the current issuance curve and everyone is staking, well, that is like maximum diversity because it's literally everyone who's staking. I guess maybe the better question is like, do we have enough diversity, and in particular, do we have like a very long tail of sort of validators? And one of the specific attacks that we want to try and mitigate is what we call a discouragement attack, where you have one single entity who's really big and who's basically bullying everyone else by just staking all of the ETH that they have and basically pushing the rewards really low and also pushing everyone else. And so what you want to try and do basically is make sure that if the rewards, the issuance goes really, really low, it goes very, very low at a large enough percentage of the total ETH stake. Now, if you want to be super conservative, you could pick, for example, 50%, right? And the reason is that there's no single entity that is remotely rich enough to control 50% of all the ETH. Like the Lido people are worried, for example, about Coinbase as a custodian for the various ETFs. I personally don't think that Coinbase will ever have anything remotely close to 50%. So that would be the strategy that I would go with. Basically, just pick a very, very conservative cap, for example, 50%, and bring the issuance down to zero around the cap.
Okay, but let's say that Coinbase, Lido, Kraken, and Binance in aggregate, and I think currently do, make up more than 50%, or the total of 50%. That could create a situation where you couldn't actually permissionlessly join the network as a validator. Is that right? Is that a concern or no?
No. So anyone can always permissionlessly join the network. It's just that past a certain point, the rewards will be very, very low. And so if you're a rational entity and you're making like literally 0% issuance, then you might as well on stake, because you're taking risk with slashing risk and whatnot. Now to your first point that Coinbase, Lido, and Kraken and Binance make up 50% of the ETH. That is totally not true. So there's about 120 million ETH in circulation. These entities in aggregate do not control 60 million ETH. There's very, very little ETH, on exchanges. I believe it's something like 15% maybe. There's maybe 1% in ETFs. That's the ballpark figure. And if you look at Lido, they control something like 28% of the current ETH staked, which is 28% of something like 35 million. So it's something like 10 million. So way smaller than the 60 million ETH.
Okay, I misspoke. I meant of the stake set, not of the total ETH in
Okay, but
circulation.
that's fine.
Right.
That's not an issue. That's not relevant to the discouragement attack that I was talking about.
Okay. All right, that's fair. So if we reduce the what is the rationale to say that if we were to reduce the amount necessary to stake to 1 ETH, that encourages more solo stakers? I mean, I do think that's intuitively correct in the sense that there's a lot more people with 1 ETH than 32 ETH, right? But is that essentially the argument? Because to me, I look at this, and you can correct me if I'm not thinking about this correctly, but like I look at it, it's still just going to be whoever has the lowest cost of capital, right? Like in that sense, I don't know why that necessarily changes the larger custodians from holding more. But I guess to counter that, which I think is your point, is that there's a lot more people with 1 ETH who would be willing to stake than the 32 ETH currently. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so Vitalik has done some polls basically where he's asked people like, what is the reason why you're not staking? And predominantly the reason is that they just don't have the 32 ETH. And so what people do instead is that they have a couple ETH on Coinbase and they just click a button and they stake, or maybe they have a couple ETH and then they exchange it for STETH. And like this whole segment of the population, which is currently captured by these pooling mechanisms, will have the freedom to basically stake on their own. And like my hope is that we're going to see kind of a golden age of sort of validating, thanks to the reduction from 32 to 1 ETH, APS, which basically dramatically reduces the sophistication to be a validator, plus the snarkification, which basically brings the hardware cost down to zero. So the barrier to entry will go down by at least one order of magnitude, maybe a couple orders of magnitude. Now, to your point around cost of capital, I actually think that individuals have a significant advantage over the institutions, and the reason is that institutions wants to make money. So if you look at Coinbase as an institution, they charge 25%. If you look at Lido as an institution, they charge 10%. And ultimately, they have relatively sophisticated teams of people behind them, and that has a cost that has to be compensated for. But when you look at the cost profile of a staker, of a sort of validator, they value their time at zero, basically. Like I'm a validator and I just do it for fun, and I don't pay 25% to Coinbase. I get the full value of my rewards. Now, the other thing that I'll say is that from a concrete APR standpoint, sort of validators are dominating institutions by an order of magnitude. And the reason is airdrop. So if you basically held STETH, then you made, whatever, X%, maybe 4% annualized. I made closer to 20% annualized because I got all of these airdrops as an early validator. And what I'm hoping will happen is that we can somehow have protocols that help identify who is a sort of validator and make use of this this quality that the sort of validators provide, which is kind of this raw decentralization as opposed to the crude economic security. So the way that I think about it is that if you're an institution, the main value proposition is just provided large amounts of crude economic security, and then there's kind of the refined economic security where you get the decentralization in addition to the economic security. And there's some protocols out there that don't care so much about the crude stuff, but do care about the refined stuff. And that is a source of yield that the large entities won't be able to capture.
All right. Yeah, that's fair. I definitely believe you and agree that solo stakers have likely outperformed Lido or Coinbase, not just for the 10 or 25% bips that they charge, but also for airdrops. I just don't know that. Yeah, airdrops, right, for the time being, right? We don't know the sustainability of that, but I think this notion of crude or refined decentralization is reasonable. Okay, so I'll just move on for a second then, unless you have anything else to say on that. Base rollups. I'm going to ask a specific question. What would be the incentive for Base, Coinbase's L2, to become a Base rollup? Not saying they will, but if you were to sell them on, you guys should become a Base rollup. Why? What would be the incentive?
Right. So you're not saying that Base will become Base, but I guess I'm happy to say that I think it's very, very likely that Base will become Based.
Very nice.
One reason is that the memes are too strong here, right? Like it's just a very, very nice coincidence that they share the same base word. The other thing that I'll say is that Base, at least currently, doesn't have a token, and as such, there's a good fit with the base sequencing, which doesn't require a new token. So if you want to have a decentralized sequencer, which is kind of credibly neutral for your community, you basically have two choices. Choice number one is that you spin up your own token, and then you have a decentralized sequencer with your own token. But in the case of Base, they don't have one. Or you kind of reuse ETH as the token for the decentralized sequencer. But now let me try and give reasons that are not specific to Base and that apply to all of the rollups. And that has to do basically with composability. So as a rollup, I believe that there's a lot of value, there's a lot of network effects to being synchronously composable with other rollups. And the only way to achieve this premium type of composability, known as synchronous composability, you need to have shared sequencing. Now, the way that I expect things will evolve is that we're going to go from the centralized sequencers that we have today, which basically create silos where you don't have synchronous composability, to clustered shared sequencing among the various clusters of rollups. And by cluster, I mean something like the superchain, like the Elastic chain, like the Polygon ecosystem, and other clusters. But the thing is that this is dropping a lot of value on the table, because you can have much stronger Ethereum-wide network effects if these clusters were to find a way to somehow collaborate with each other. And if there's two clusters that find a way to collaborate with each other, then they're much, much, much stronger together. And so, I expect this kind of snowball effect where once the clusters find a way to collaborate with each other, then all of the clusters will want to join the party. Now, if you look at two specific clusters, for example, the optimism cluster and the arbitrum cluster, the only way in which they're going to, collaborate is if they can find a third-party, credibly neutral shared sequencer. Arbitrum is not going to want to use the optimism sequencer and vice versa. And as far as I can tell, the only credibly neutral Ethereum sequencer that works Ethereum-wide is Ethereum itself. And the reason is that it doesn't introduce a new token, a new brand, or a new security assumption. And so if indeed the network effects are as strong as I believe that they are, then in some sense, base sequencing is destined to win, because it's the only kind of Ethereum-wide shared sequencer.
Yeah. I think also, to your credit, I mean, I don't know if this is the exact same, but for the most part, the L2 tokens haven't taken on a lot of responsibility. And I think generally ETH is considered the exported asset thus far, right? Like there was a lot of discussion, 2 or 3 years ago, that with all these rollups, they would all use their own token as the gas token. And we really haven't seen that play out. So there is certainly some, I think, they're sort of using, it depends on which rollup you're talking about, but they're sort of using them for sequencing governance rights. But I would just say, for the most part, the exporting ETH asset has generally worked thus far. I did listen to Team, I think his name is, right? He did a presentation on base rollups. I got the impression that his version of base rollups was sort of predicated on the idea that these rollups would be mainly app chains. Do you agree with this? And I'll just add one other point that he said, which was I think the analogy he gave was, okay, Base is not sharing any of the MEV revenue with Aerodome right now. Aerodome is generating a lot of MEV for Base, and they should be able to get that, they should be able to return that to either themselves or their users. And so we won't have to sell these, rollups, or I guess apps here on Base rollups, because they'll want to become Base rollups themselves. But do you see Base rollups primarily acting as app chains, or these general purpose L2s that we have currently?
So I'm also very much a proponent of the app chain thesis. I think once we can lower the barrier to entry to launching an app chain, then we're going to see a flourishing of app chains. Now, let me try and explain how we can lower the barrier to entry, and then I'll explain why I think we're going to see a flourishing. In order to lower the barrier to entry to app chains, we need to build a bunch of shared infrastructure for all of the app chains so that the amortized cost is basically zero. So that includes sharing the verification of the snark proofs in the case of ZK rollups. That includes shared block packing, shared data compression, and shared atomicity with infrastructure like EigenLayer, and also shared deposits, where if you want to do a transfer from one app chain to another app chain, you don't have to go through the L1. So that's another gas optimization. So once we've built all of this infrastructure, and we're talking about quite a bit of infrastructure, then the barrier to entry to launching as an app chain will be extremely low. Now, in terms of the advantages of launching as an app chain, especially a based app chain, is that you're building on top of Ethereum. You're not building on top of something else. And so the cognitive friction, for users goes way down. You're not inheriting the governance risk and the security committee of some underlying L2. So you're improving your security profile. You're also, as Matthew was saying, improving the economics, right? Because now you potentially have an opportunity to recapture the transaction fees and or the MEV that you generate. Like if you're building an application on top of an L2, all of the congestion fees will accrue to the L2, not to the application. And by the way, like my personal thesis is that MEV is going to zero, and specifically MEV that leaks to the proposer, to the sequencer is going to zero. And so we're only going to be left with congestion fees. And it's very, very easy to see that if you launch as an app chain, you get to control the congestion fees, not the L2. And the downside of an app chain is that if you're not connected to the rest of the ecosystem, if you're like your own silo, then you're just going to die out. And so what you want is to have like this strong composability with the rest of the ecosystem. And so you want to have this notion of a shared sequencer. And so you want to be very, very careful in terms of which sequencer you're going to use. And as I previously explained, I think that the best choice is for you to choose the base sequencer. And for different applications, like there's different things that matter. Whether it's the economics, whether it's the cognitive friction, or whether it's the security, or even the neutrality. So if you take an application like ENS, right? Like ENS can only be deployed as one L2. It's not like Uniswap where they can just redeploy on top of all of the L2s. And it would be crazy for ENS to launch on top of Optimism, because they would be making some sort of a choice which compromises their neutrality. So in some sense, ENS has no choice but to launch as a base rollup. And actually, during DEF CON, they announced the L2, which is called the name chain.
Okay. All right. Well, this is all good. All right. For the last bit, I think we should zoom out. I'm just going to ask you a bunch of sort of random questions, just thoughts I had. Okay. Since the merge, what if anything, would you have done differently? You said, you said at the beginning, we've learned a lot. We learned a lot about MEV. We've learned a lot about the issuance. What in your mind, like maybe you could give like one or two examples ordered from, biggest, what is something you would have done differently when ETH2 was being designed?
So one of the big moments where we kind of pivoted, I guess, is the rollup centric roadmap, where basically there was a suggestion that the broader community should have their own shards, to use the terminology that we had. Now the technical reason for doing this is that we wanted to have maximally trustless shards, and in particular, we wanted those shards to not have attached to them what's called an honest majority assumption. So if you have fraud proofs or if you have snarks, then you're either trusting that one guy on the internet is kind of paying attention and is basically submitting fraud proofs, or you're just trusting pure cryptography, which is even better than trusting one guy. But the thing that we wanted to avoid is basically having an honest majority, where we're basically saying we want at least 51% of the validators that are securing this one shard to be honest. And one of the reasons why we were kind of worried with this assumption is because for sharding with these randomly sampled committees, the committee sizes are actually relatively small. And so you might have 1,000 validators that for a small period of time are basically securing this one shard, and you rely on the honest majority assumption. But what if you could specifically target those 1,000 validators and bribe them, or somehow get them to collude with each other? This would be like so much simpler than trying to bribe the whole validator set, which has tens of billions of dollars of economic security and involves many more parties. And so ultimately, we kind of took this very purist approach, where we said, the only way to, in reasonable time, deploy these trustless shards is to open it up to the community. But I think what we could have done differently, I'm not saying this would have necessarily led to better outcomes, but what we could have done differently is basically have, on a much faster timeline, these honest majority shards. Now, one of the things that has happened since the rollup-centric roadmap is dank sharding. And what dank sharding gives us is basically synchronous data sharding. So previously, the way that we were thinking of doing data sharding is that we have these committees, and because they're independent committees, you have these independent asynchronous shards. But what Dankrat figured out is actually there is a way to have synchronous data sharding. So, and the other realization that we had fairly recently is that if you have real-time proving with snarks, then you can also do synchronous execution sharding, which is kind of the best type of sharding that you could ever hope for. And so in some sense, I am kind of pleased that we didn't go with this route of the honest majority asynchronous shards, because now we have the better synchronous design. The other thing that I'll say as well is that the incentives kind of changed pretty dramatically in the two worlds. In the world that we live in, things are much more messy, but in some sense, they're also much more vibrant and organic. So you have companies like Kraken and Coinbase and WorldCoin that are basically investing large amounts of effort in order to bring tens, if not hundreds of millions of users onto Ethereum. So we're kind of offering a way to offer a carrot to these builders that will do BD in addition to building technology on top of Ethereum. If we had done everything ourselves, then there wouldn't be such an incentive. And so it's very difficult to try and imagine the counterfactual, but I'm actually pretty pleased with the path that we've gone down. It's the hard path, the slow path, the messy path, but ultimately it is the one that's much, much more powerful.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to ask, I talked to a lot of MEV people, almost everybody I talk to says PBS was a mistake, but everybody has a different opinion as to why PBS was a mistake. I'm curious, first of all, if you think PBS was a mistake or not, and if so, why, and if not, why not?
So PBS is the natural outcome where you basically have a decentralized sequencer where at any given slot you have a monopolistic power that's given to the current proposer. People saying it's a mistake basically don't understand like how natural of an outcome it is, and they often don't provide an alternative. Now the alternative that we are aware of today is called APS, where basically some of the negative externalities of the centralization, the very natural centralization of the MEV pipeline are basically segregated away from the validator. So it's less about trying to reduce the centralization, but more about containing it and making sure that it doesn't pollute the validator set. Now, there is one team out there that is trying to constructively provide a solution, which is Flashbots. And just yesterday, actually, they released Build-A-Net, right? Which is...
Yeah, I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, so go ahead.
Basically, the best that we can do, I think, at layer one is basically make sure that the MEV pipeline, if it were like maximally centralized, and what I say kind of to exaggerate is that imagine that the whole MEV pipeline is controlled by the devil. Even in that very extreme situation, Ethereum would just go on just fine. There wouldn't be any safety or liveness failures. There wouldn't be front running. There wouldn't be all of the there wouldn't be censorship. Thanks to the inclusion list. So everything would be running smoothly. But still, from a mimetic standpoint, it's very bad that the devil would be building 100% of Ethereum blocks. And by the devil, just replace that by Citadel. But it would be a bad look if Citadel were to build 100% of the blocks. And so, Flashbots has been working very hard to try and fix this, the mimetics of builder centralization. And what the suggesting is basically to use T's, and I think it's a fine solution. It's a very pragmatic one, and I'm looking forward to see how it develops over the coming months. Right now, it's not perfect in the sense that they still have this whitelisting mechanism where they only allow certain entities to participate in the Build-A-Net, but hopefully eventually it will be totally permissionless, and anyone can contribute to the decentralized block building.
Okay. Another question I had for you. There's a lot. I'm sure you follow crypto Twitter. You see a lot of the regurgitated criticisms that are hurled around, right? L2s are parasitic. Ethereum has no North Star. The L1's not moving fast enough. Which criticism do you resonate with most? Which one do you lend the most legitimacy to? And then which one would you say is completely illegitimate or nonsense and you completely disagree with? So, but once again, I didn't necessarily name all the criticism. You can pick and choose what you want. I'm just curious which you think are legit and which aren't.
Right. So I think the most legit criticism is that Ethereum has a fragmentation problem. And this is something that I've dedicated most of this year to try and fix with base sequencing and base pre-confirmations. And I think we are on a path, as a community with all sorts of solutions, above and beyond base sequencing to actually fix this fragmentation problem. And my mental model is that basically Ethereum is going through this awkward kind of teenager phase, and it will grow out of it. It's just a matter of waiting for the maturation process to happen, and eventually we will have totally seamless, fully abstracted UX with synchronous composability and all of the goodies that we want. Now, in terms of illegitimate, I think most of the criticisms are illegitimate. So happy to answer to specific ones. But let's take, for example, the L1's not moving fast enough. I think this is just a fundamental misunderstanding of the role of the L1. The role of the L1 is to basically be the most robust, the most secure settlement layer for the Internet of Value. It it needs to move slow, and it's actually perfectly fine for it to move slow. You have entities like Mac Resnick or Doug, who are suggesting these 1 second slot times. I think this is exactly the wrong direction that we should be going down. Basically, this is the Solana direction. If you look at Solana, the only way to participate is if you have a data center grade 10 gigabit connection, and you control server grade hardware, and if you look at the map of the validators, it's extremely centralized. There's like 3 nodes in Africa or something, and if they were to play this game of basically constantly trying to reduce the slot time, which is what I think they want to do. This is what Anatoly says. He wants to go from 400 milliseconds to 50 milliseconds or something. The centralization is just going to get more and more extreme, and eventually you kind of hit these speed of light considerations. Like the much smarter, you kind of work smarter, not harder. Like the much smarter way of handling things is that you have these generous slot times that are several seconds long, that allow for maximum decentralization, and then from a UX standpoint, you provide the pre-confirmations. The other kind of criticism that people have with Ethereum is they want the gas limit to be much higher. Let's 10x the gas limit, 100x the gas limit, and it's the exact same story here, right? If we were to 10x or 100x the gas limit right now, we would just lose a lot of the richness that we have in terms of the validators, and so we would never do that if it means compromising the decentralization of the validator set. So the proper way to handle this is basically to find there's two points. The first point is that we want to have a scalable and sustainable way to grow the total throughput. And what we have today is basically horizontal scalability through the various L2s. And if you go to rollup.WTF, you'll see that the aggregate throughput of all the L2s is roughly 100x that of the L1. So basically the mega gas per second that we're churning through is 100x if you look at the L2s. And what will happen over the next year is that this will go to 1,000x, and then the year after that, it might grow to 10,000x, and then 100,000x, and then potentially millions of times the throughput of the L1. And this is what we want. Instead, what entities like Solana are doing is that they're trying to fit everything within the L1, and necessarily they're going to hit a wall, right? And the reason is that you have your 10 gigabit per second connection. Each transaction consumes some number of bytes, and so you're going to have a hard cap on the number of transactions that you can process. And the exact same argument can be said about this, the CPUs. The CPUs are running at a certain frequency, and there's only so many of them, and so eventually you're going to hit a hard wall. And so if the L1 is ever going to increase its throughput, it needs to do so in a way that doesn't jeopardize the validators. And the good news is that there is such a way, which is you snarkify the EVM. So every time a sophisticated block proposer proposes a block, it comes with a proof, and the validators only have to verify the proof, and that takes 1 millisecond. And that means that we can effectively 10x, 100x, or maybe even remove the gas limit from an execution standpoint, because there no longer is this denial of service vector on the validators that have to manually re-execute the blocks.
Yeah. I remember hearing after the merge, I don't know if this was you, but I definitely heard it from other people, right? But I certainly heard the notion of a settlement layer coming from you after the merge. And I'm curious now, what are your thoughts in terms of if there's an app developer who wants to come and build on Ethereum? Now, I guess the question I'm going to ask is, what application developers should build on the L1, and which application developers should build on L2s? And I understand that your notion of base rollups is going to kind of hopefully nullify this question to some extent. But for the time being, what do you see, like when app developers come, who do you say in your mind you should build on the L1 versus you should build on an L2?
Well, the ideal outcome, as we discussed, is that you all launched as an app chain, and you launch it on top of Ethereum. That would be kind of the most credibly neutral solution. Now, if you if there's like some aspect of an L2 that you like, so for example, if you like the public goods funding of Optimism and that's really aligned with what you're trying to do, then great, then go build on top of Optimism. If you want to cater for Coinbase users, you launch Aetherflow meme coin, then go build on top of Base. But like for those users that were considering launching on L1, whether that's for the neutrality, for the security, if those entities should basically launch as an app chain, and you can think of an app chain as just being, especially a based app chain, as being the equivalent of an L1 contract where the fees are just so much lower, let's say 100 times lower. So the ideal outcome is that we blur the lines between the contract and an app chain. And like all of the shared infrastructure that I was talking about, the shared proof verification, shared block packing, blah, 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 basically means that these lines get completely blurred, and we're just left with the 100x gas efficiency.
Yeah. I remember after the merge, you were talking a lot about decentralized stables and using ETH as this, pristine collateral. Why do you think we haven't seen a big surge in decentralized stables, and to what extent are you concerned that a lot of the stablecoin usage is primarily centralized stablecoins?
Right. So my main concern around the centralized stablecoins is that they're not going to scale. Right, they've reached, call it $100 billion, but are they going to reach $100 trillion of decentralized stablecoins? And I think it would be insane to have $100 trillion of stablecoins that are kind of operated by Tether. And really what we want, if we want decentralized stablecoins to win in a big way, is that we need to find a way to decentralize them. Otherwise, they're too much of a systemic risk for the whole ecosystem. And I think one of the big blockers to building a decentralized stablecoin is actually to just have a decentralized price oracle. That is a required primitive in order to build a decentralized stablecoin. And right now we have like terrible solutions. We have things like Chainlink, which are it's like basically a multi-sig with 20 different entities. It's not remotely decentralized. And so what I'm hoping will happen is that we can build much better decentralized stablecoins using the Ethereum validator set. So using some form of restaking that would give us these better decentralized stablecoins. Now the problem with better oracles. The problem with oracles is that they're subjective, and so you need to handle them properly, and I guess this is where the eigen intersubjective token could potentially play a role.
Yeah. Actually, I wanted to ask you a little bit about restaking. So that's one example, right? Like a price oracle, and then maybe also pre-confs, my understanding, could also benefit from restaking. What do you see as the primary use cases then of restaking going forward? And when do you think these will emerge? Like I don't know if I'm being overly critical or I'm not paying attention, but I don't know exactly what restaking is used for right now. I've seen some DA stuff, but for the most, maybe it's probably still in its infancy. But where do you see restaking like really coming like to the forefront and being very useful for applications and whatnot on Ethereum?
Right. So let me just first address one of the comments that you said, that restaking could be useful in the context of pre-confirmations. So when I wrote the base pre-confirmations ETH research post, I did indeed mention restaking as a way to provide the collateral. I would just completely ignore this ETH research post because the design has evolved so much. It's just so much better now. It's much simpler as well. And the reason why I would not advocate for restaking for pre-confirmations is because we only need a tiny amount of collateral, on the order of 1 ETH in order to provide pre-confirmations for the vast majority of users. Now, in terms of applications of restaking, you mentioned one, which is EigenDA. This is another kind of application that requires an intersubjective token because there is no objective way of handling DA faults. And I actually think that alone, this single application, is just enough to justify the whole restaking effort. And the reason is that Ethereum DA is like extremely scarce. And if you want to quantify it, you basically have these validators that are on home internet connections, and dank sharding gives you 100x multiply over that. So for the whole internet of value, you have 100 home internet connections. There's just not going to be enough throughput. And so you need some sort of overflow infrastructure. And in some sense, the most Ethereum native, the most aligned, if you want to call it that way, overflow DA solution would be something like EigenDA.
Okay. One last question. You spend most of your time working on the protocol layer and really trying to create the most robust L1 imaginable. What application or use case are you most excited for? Just show me, like, in the next 5-10 years, like what really excites you for users on Ethereum or the L2s, base rollups, whatever you want to call it. Like what gets you excited in terms of this is what people are going to be doing on Ethereum in the next 5 or 10 years?
I mean, what I want to see is all of finance moving on top of Ethereum, like the whole thing. And yeah, sure, it starts with decentralized stablecoins, but then you want to one by one build all of the money Legos. And we have like really primitive money Legos. We have the swapping, we have the loans, and I'm just hoping that we can rebuild one by one all of the layers of finance. I do acknowledge that this is a very abstract answer, but one of the things that I'm very excited about is basically permissionless innovation. So right now, if you take the status quo and you want to build some sort of like money Lego on top of the BlackRock, some sort of BlackRock product, what you need to do is you need to put on a suit, go to New York, talk to Larry, and it's a process that will take 2 years and $10 million of legal fees. And I'm hoping that we basically open up the genie in terms of permissionless innovation, and we get this golden era of innovation, just like we had with the internet. And so the abstract answer basically is I'm hoping to see things that I can't even imagine today. Just like I couldn't have imagined Uber or Airbnb or Amazon Prime or all of these things that we now take for granted.
Yeah, sorry, I said that was the last question. I do this a lot, but on that note, I think people will be very encouraged to hear that you want to see finance built, the new financial system built atop Ethereum, because I think there has been some criticisms that the Ethereum, and more specifically maybe the Ethereum Foundation, doesn't care about DeFi. And so I think people will be encouraged to hear you say that. But why do you think that has been a criticism levied as of late, that the EF doesn't care about DeFi? They almost have disdain for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like a personal opinion of Vitalik, and his voice carries a lot of weight, and like people kind of assimilate what Vitalik says to all of the EF. I think Vitalik makes a very good point that a lot of DeFi is kind of financial masturbation, and is very degen, it's very zero sum, and ultimately we should try and avoid that. And I think Solana is all about financial masturbation and the zero sum aspect of the meme coin casino. And I'm not at all a proponent of that, and I think the social layer should try and work to minimize it and basically encourage real innovation.
Okay, well, Justin, thank you for coming on. I do appreciate it. I thought it was really good, and I hope that I asked some questions that you haven't been asked as of late. So yeah, much appreciated.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.